Paul Crovo is a gentleman that I have known for several years now, as we've both been involved in the Patriot movement. He is an energy analyst in the banking industry. He has also been a very active patriot in the local groups here and has spoken to our meeting before on energy-related issues. So we are very happy to have Paul Crovo as our moderator. Thank you, Paul, and I will let him introduce the speakers.
Thank you very much, Jaime, for your kind introduction. Welcome, everybody, to the Marcellus Shale Forum here at CCG tonight. We have a very nice array of speakers here to cover the different areas, the different issues that the Marcellus Shale has brought to light. But just to start off, I asked Jaime if I could just have like 3 or 4 minutes to give a brief introduction and think about the bigger picture here, because what we're talking about in the Marcellus Shale is something that applies to the country as a whole. What's called the unconventional gas resource here in the Marcellus, which goes from northeastern Pennsylvania southwest into the southwestern part of the state and into West Virginia, parts of western Maryland, is a basin that is not necessarily unique to the United States. There's many, many unconventional gas and unconventional oil basins in this country, a number of which have been very prolific in terms of the amount of oil that we've been able to pull out of the ground. Some of those, just to mention real quick, the Eagle Ford Shale, which some of you might have heard about in Southwest Texas, the Bakken, which is one of the best known in terms of its oil shale production in North Dakota, and several others. But what I'm trying to get you to think about is big picture, because a lot of the issues that these gentlemen and Katrina will be talking about tonight apply not just to the Marcellus, but to the whole country. Some of the things I'd like you to keep in the back of your mind as you listen to our speakers tonight. First of all, the environmental issues have been first and foremost in terms of the media coverage that you've seen here in Pennsylvania. There, I think, are a lot of myths that are out there that hopefully can be dispelled by some of our speakers tonight. There are a lot of uncertainties, a lot of studies that need to take place in order to make sure that hydraulic fracturing becomes and continues to be an environmentally friendly process where we're not endangering our water supplies and so forth. Some of those issues revolve around water disposal after the water is used in the process of fracturing. Some of the issues revolve around possible methane infiltration into the water aquifers. There have been some studies, such as the Duke study, which some of you may or may not know about. I won't go into the detail there, but this is an ongoing process nonetheless. So the environmental issue is number one. Secondly, we need to recognize that the technology that is on display here by the oil and gas industry has been prime mover in being able to discover and bring these formations into production. We're talking about technology enabling oil and gas companies to drill down 10,000 feet or more, make a 90-degree turn, and go through a shale, seam of shale for another 10,000 feet. Just 4, 5, 6 years ago, that kind of technology didn't exist and would have been unheard of. This is a technology that is also exportable, which means a lot of U.S. companies can take this technology overseas. It generates jobs, and it helps generate a lot of energy security, which is my next brief subject. In terms of our U.S. supplies, right now we import about roughly 40% of our oil, 60%. 40% of it we produce here in the country, and that production level has been surging over the last year or so, largely because of formations like the Bakken, which is currently producing about 450,000 barrels a day. A lot of people are expecting that possibly go to 1 million barrels a day within the next few to several years. So there's an energy security issue here at a time when we have so many problems in the Middle East and West Africa and so forth. It's also a security issue for Europe. Europe very heavily dependent on Russian gas. To the extent we can develop unconventional gas in Europe, that will help them be less dependent on Russia. I touched on job creation. That's a part of the economic issue that our speakers will be addressing tonight. And then lastly, and I'll get on with the panel, there are other industries that are deriving a secondary benefit. Industries such as the petrochemical industry. One of the byproducts of what's called wet gas, much of which comes out of the shale gas resource, is convertible into a natural gas liquid called ethane. Ethane right now is offering a substantial advantage to U.S. petrochemical producers such as Eastman Chemical, Lyondell, and others relative to their foreign competition. This has been a boon to our U.S. petrochemical industry and its direct benefit from shale gas drilling. I won't go any further. Those are just some of the things to keep in the back of your mind, some of the issues to think about as our speakers talk to you tonight. I'll outline real quickly here how we'll be going through this. Each of the speakers will have about 15 minutes to talk about their subject, after which we'll have about a 45-minute Q&A, and then at that time, Jaime will have closing comments. Now with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Bill Stewart. Bill is a director of the Keystone Energy Forum. He has been a member of the House and the Senate in Harrisburg, was for 21 years, and currently is an independent consultant with a contract with the API, or American Petroleum Institute. Could we please give a warm welcome to Mr. Stewart?
Thank you. Is this on? Thank you very much. My name is Bill Stewart. I'm from Johnstown, PA. I was a member of the State House and State Senate for 21 years, but I retired over 14 years ago. So if anything happened that you don't like in the last 14 years, don't blame me. If it was before that, I'll talk to you later. Since my retirement, I've been operating as an independent consultant on government and business issues. No political and no lobbying. I had enough of that in the previous life. To put the Keystone Energy Forum in context, in 07, 08, 09, and in 2010, I had a consulting contract with the American Petroleum Institute, and the mission there was to educate the Pennsylvania congressional delegation on some of the issues that they were following in Washington, mainly offshore drilling. When you're not a coastal state like Pennsylvania, you don't pay much attention, and the legislators were always asking questions, so I was serving in that capacity. I got involved in some of the work on climate change that I think all of you are familiar with. My friend Paul Saunders back there and I collaborated on a number of times on that issue. But in 2010, API called us, a couple of consultants in, and said they had moved into the Marcellus play in Pennsylvania, and they were a little bit dismayed and couldn't understand why they were getting all this pushback, and they were going. They had their people going into meetings, and there were pickets outside, and they weren't quite sure what was going on. So they asked me if I could give them an analysis of what the problem was. So for about 5 or 6 weeks, I went to a lot of meetings throughout Pennsylvania and sat back in the meetings like this, but I sat back in the corner just quietly listening and taking notes. And what I came up with and reported back to the API, that's the trade association, was that they needed to improve their ground game. They were doing great and wonderful things on TV with TV commercials and talking about jobs and everything, but there were a whole bunch of things they were missing in Pennsylvania in the ground game. They weren't doing a good job of informing the locals whenever one of their member companies moved in to set up get a permit and set up a drill pad. They weren't at all aware of the constitutional provision in Pennsylvania of the right to clean air and clean water and how precious that was to a lot of people. They were used to operating in Texas and Oklahoma where county governments are everything. They don't have townships and boroughs and like Pennsylvania does, so they were kind of bypassing all the local governments, which wasn't a good thing. So out of all that, they got together with PIOGA. PIOGA is the Pennsylvania Independent Oil and Gas Association. Now they've been in Pennsylvania for a long, long time, 100-some years. And most of their members, it's another trade association, most of their members do the shallow wells. But now a lot of them have gotten into the deep and horizontal Marcellus wells. So API and PIOGA got together and decided that there needed to be an education and outreach component to their efforts. Thus, the Keystone Energy Forum was created. Our mission is to reach out to anybody and everybody who's interested in the subject, explain what we can about it, try to raise the knowledge level so that when there is a debate, when there is a discussion, people aren't screaming at each other and they're using facts to support whatever position they take, for or against, but at least the discussion is based on fact and not anecdote or he said, he told her, who told him, who told someone. One of the reasons the industry was kind of taken back by the initial reaction in Pennsylvania was they had viewed Pennsylvania, and we view ourselves as long been an oil and gas state. You're probably all familiar with the original Drake oil well in Oil City. If you go to that museum over there, anybody ever been to the Drake Museum? You could see there's a whole section in there on hydrofracking. Hydrofracking is nothing new. What's new about this whole process is the amount and pressure and the horizontal aspect of it. So they thought that Pennsylvanians were somewhat familiar, like Texas and Oklahoma, where they do a lot of drilling, and didn't realize that many Pennsylvanians weren't. So there were all kinds of questions floating around and all kinds of wrong answers floating around. Another reason they thought they would be okay with the middle-of-the-road environmentalists, obviously not the hardcore, but the middle-of-the-road ones, because the environmentalists had always said that natural gas would be the bridge to the future, until they got alternative wind and solar and whatever put together. And it's obviously cleaner than coal. Many of the national groups, including the Sierra Club, always called it a bridge to the future, until they realized that it was probably going to be the future. And then they backed off. Another reason is the sheer size of the formation. It was evident to them that once people knew how big this thing was, they would start learning more about it, recognizing that it was going to be a game changer, or could be a game changer for our national energy policy, and come to the realization that it should be embraced. And then Penn State, Tom Murphy's here, and Dr. Engelder started throwing out the trillion figure in in reserves and estimation of how much this shale held, and that began that pretty much began the land rush, or the gold rush, as it's called. As he had mentioned, it's not the only game in town. A lot of people are saying, well, if we don't do this, if they don't do that, they can't leave because the gas is here. They got to stay here for the gas. Well, as you can see by that map, there are a number of shale formations throughout the country that some of them, the ones down in Texas, are already being drilled and are in production. But the point is, it's not the only game in town. And it's globally, you can see the yellow there on the left where the United States is, the size of that circle compared to the circles over there in the Mideast. We are probably the third, I believe, third largest oil or gas deposit in the entire globe. So, what's going on since the play's been found? Well, many people are calling it the road to energy security. You can debate that left, right, up or down. As I said before, it's cleaner than coal. It's ours. It's American, and it makes good business sense. The picture there is the UPS has converted almost 90% of their entire fleet in California to natural gas. It's cheaper. It's about $1.47, I think the current price is, comparable price to $3.49 a gallon in gasoline. So what's all the fuss? Well, there are different aspects of the drilling process, and some cause more consternation than others. So I'm just going to go through it real quickly, the basics of what the process is all about. I'm sure the other panelists will get into some of the more specific ones later. It starts with pre-drilling. That's where they explore through seismic tests and whatnot. Then the drilling, then the completion, and then they go into actual production into a pipeline. That gives you pretty much of a timeline. It takes about 6 months to get all the permitting in place. Down there in the lower left, the actual research that started back in the early 2000s takes about 5 years. Actual start to finish, from a well pad to the actual production of a well and fracking and all that, takes about a year. And they are estimating, and I've heard anything from 20 to 40 years worth of production out of a well. I haven't, that's still to be determined, but I haven't heard any of the experts say anything less than 20 years. Exploration is pretty much the state of the art these days. It used to be, from television and movies, you heard about all the drilling in Texas. They get a dry hole and then they move on and try someplace else. Not so with Marcellus. The technology is such, they know once they do the exploration and the seismic testing, they pretty much know exactly where they're going, exactly what they're going to get, so they're not poking holes all over the place like they did in the old days. There are different ways they explore. You may have seen, well, maybe not here in a non-drilling county, but that machine there on the right is called a thumper. It's something to watch. It's got a big plate on the bottom of it. It drives slowly along the side of the road, and the plate comes down and pounds the ground, and then they have microphones and seismic devices all over that take the feedback and tells them pretty much what's under the ground. Geophones, they're called. Leasing is where the individual companies have what they're called landmen. They go in where they think they want to drill. They talk to the landowner and they negotiate a lease. Currently, they're paying around $2,300 an acre, and then they get royalties later on from whatever's taken out of the ground. For those who say they are unregulated, those are just some. There's a couple pages of it. That's just one page of the permits that are required before a company can even begin. Now, a big issue we found over the course of last year is water. It's a bigger issue than I think it ought to be, but that's up for debate. The industry has taken great pains to make sure that when the drilling process goes through the water table, that section of it is encased to completely isolate the drilling activity from the water table. That is a key part of any inspection. If there's been any groundwater contamination anywhere, it has come from this, not fracking. Fracking is different than drilling. Drilling and fracking, keep that in mind, are two different things. If there's any groundwater contamination anywhere, it's due to a failure in that particular portion of the process. And that process is no different than what's been going on for 150 years, drilling a shallow well. It doesn't become a Marcellus horizontal well until you get a mile down. So this is the same process that's been used for a long, long time. There you can see a rendition of the layering of pipes and cement that are used going through the aquifer. That little picture there gives you an idea of what a Marcellus well can do as compared to a regular shallow well. Those little square blocks represent the number of separate wells you would have to drill, put the rigs up and drill to equal one Marcellus pad there in the yellow in the middle that can reach the same amount of natural gas. So in essence, it's cleaner than regular shallow well drilling because you're disrupting a whole lot less of the surface, because you don't need all those 24 wells. You just need one to get the same amount of gas. That's a slice of the earth of what it looks like. They go down through about a mile through those layers. They get about 500 feet up above where the shale is, and the drill bits, the high-tech drill bits that were developed for horizontal drilling, make the turn. They go over another 8 to 10,000 feet. And all the time now, this is all getting encased with steel and cement and to keep it isolated. Then they put a charge down on the horizontal part that creates the fissures in the shale, which are then subjected to the high pressure water, which is the hydrofracking. The water goes in, mixed with sand, props open the cracks, and then the gas comes out. Along with the actual drilling, you need the infrastructure, the pipes. That'll be coming next. That gives you an aerial view of all those red things are compressors. They're pressurizing the water that's going to go into the well. The fluid is about 90% water, about 10% sand, and then about 0.5% of various chemicals. Those are the list of the chemicals. There's a new program called Frac Focus where detailed listing of chemicals are available to the general public. It's on a website. The storage is big ponds on the well site. They're no longer, that's all fresh water now. There used to be some of the flowback water was in those ponds, but they've all changed to 100% recycling, and the flowback water is kept in tanks. So the only water you see on a well site now is like that pond there is fresh water. That's the whole issue of flowback management. Pennsylvania has instituted a rule in late 10 or early 11 that anything discharged from a well has to meet the total dissolved solids, which is drinking water standards. So anything that leaves that site and goes into a stream has to be drinking water standards in Pennsylvania. The amount of water is always an issue. It's not that much compared to, on the left there you see, that's what current power companies use. Public water systems in the middle, all the way down there on the right-hand side is what Marcellus, that would be with full capacity, every permit that's been issued running full blast. They use a lot of water per well, but compared to what everybody else uses, it's not a whole lot. Roads are always an issue. That's kind of a local government thing. They work those out with the drilling companies. Restoration will be down the road. Although we're not in that stage yet, but when it's all said and done, the bottom picture is pretty much what you have left. That's just the wellhead, and the gas comes out of there into some sort of a pipe system. So from the air, you can hardly tell they were ever there. They're going to get into, I think Tom's going to get into some of the economics, so I won't go into that. So the challenges are, for the industry, public education, and that's what the forum's all about. Natural gas usage has to catch up. Everybody's playing catch up here with this whole play. As more trucks and cars and industry starts using more and more of the gas, things will level out. But right now it's real cheap because there's so much of it. But that's going to level itself out. Workforce development was a problem early, but I'll tell you, the educational system in Pennsylvania, the community colleges, the technical schools in Penn State, and I mean, just everybody in education has stepped up to the plate. And there was initial influx of a whole bunch of out-of-state workers because it's a specialty, and there was no education system built. But now there is, and 9 out of 10 of the workers on the gas rigs are Pennsylvanians. We still don't have a national energy policy. That's something we'll probably be fighting forever, but natural gas now needs to figure into it because it's no longer scarce. There's a lot of it. And then the pipeline system that has to carry it to market is still underway. It hasn't caught up. But all in all, I have found, and I'm from a non-drilling county as well. Cambria County, I think, has one well where I live, much like Bucks is. So, all in all, if people would educate themselves to what it's all about, there are questions, there are issues, there are challenges. There's no question about it. But you can't have a dialogue with the drilling industry, the natural gas industry, unless you have some basic knowledge of how to phrase your questions, what questions to ask, and that's what we're all about. The packet I gave you has some fact sheets in. Please visit our website. There's a ton of information on our website. You can research just about any aspect of Marcellus drilling there. There's a way on the website to contact us if you have any questions. So I think, personally, I'm not lobbying for the industry, but I think personally as a Pennsylvanian, this is going to take us back to the days of coal and steel. I'm from Johnstown, and we lost 25,000 people when the steel industry left. So I can appreciate what this really means to our economy and our country. Thank you very much.